Hey guys, in today's video I'm going to share with you the unbelievable and breathtaking story of Isadora Winthrop, a respected pastor who literally died for a few moments during a service in Asheville and came back with an urgent message that could transform your life. What she experiences on the threshold of death reveals the shocking truth about empty faith versus a real relationship with God, and will shake all her certainties. So before we dive into this intense and impactful journey, leave your like. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Get ready. This story will change the way you see spirituality. My name is Isadora Winthrop, and for 23 years the pulpit of Grace Hope Baptist Church has been my home, my stage, my fortress. I still remember the slightly sweet smell of polished oak as I walked toward the altar, greeting each face as if it carried within it the very reflection of divine grace. The congregation, a community united in the love of Christ, was waiting for me. I had learned to decipher every sigh, every smile, every expectant look. Behind the scenes, however, a different voice echoed within me. It wasn't a doubt. It was a certainty that I was the one chosen to guide souls. I studied the scriptures obsessively, jotting down passages in the margins of sacred books, and refining each word of the sermon as if I were polishing a diamond. At night, when the lights went out and the church fell into silence, I mentally reviewed each future sermon, imagining silent applause, confirmations, and testimonies. "Lord, use me," I murmured, but without realizing that my prayers had become selfish contracts for spiritual success. My fellow pastors respected me. Community leaders often came to me for advice. There was even a local religious magazine that called me the steadfast voice of spiritual awakening in the South. That validation was like oxygen. The more I got, the more I needed. And then there was Evelyn, a faithful young woman I saw every Sunday, bright-eyed but carrying a quiet sadness. I encouraged her often, trusting that my word would be enough to heal wounds that I myself might not understand. Little did I know that my own faith, although seemingly unshakable, rested on pillars of pride. The daily ritual of prayer before worship was almost mechanical. Knees bent, hands together, eyes closed, lips forming words of devotion that no longer touched my heart. The feeling was like floating in an ocean without a current, comfortable but sterile. On that fateful night, however, something inside me was preparing to crumble. The conviction that had sustained me until then would begin to reveal deep cracks ready to open under the weight of a truth that I had never imagined facing. When I stepped into the pulpit that Thursday, there was something in the air, not the usual joyful fervor, but a subtle tension like before a thunderstorm. The church was packed, human warmth mixed with the aroma of incense and the hemp books used to cover the antique chairs. As I held my Bible, I felt a weight in my chest that I attributed to the emotion of the moment. I began reading Matthew 7:21 in a steady voice, projecting each syllable with my trademark authority. But then the words began to tremble on the page, as if written in invisible ink. My vision darkened at the edges and a low hum filled my ears, drowning out the sound of the choir singing behind me. "Lord, not now," I thought, trying to focus on the verses. His hands shook as he closed the book. My breathing became irregular, short, as if there was something squeezing my chest from the inside. A corrosive heat ran through my arms, up my neck, and burned behind my eyes. When I tried to take the next step, my legs gave out. In slow motion, I saw the ground approaching. I heard a collective murmur, a dull shock as my body collided with the worn carpet of the pulpit. The sound of screams exploded around me as if a wave was hitting me from all sides. "Call the paramedic," I heard someone scream. My mind wandered in a restless fog. I wanted to speak, to apologize, to reassure those faces full of terror, but the air couldn't reach my lungs. Everything slowed down. The hurried footsteps ascending the pulpit, the cold hands of the brothers holding me, the muffled voice of Marcus Cole urgently calling my name. The church ceiling, that ornate ceiling I had admired so often, rotated in an endless cycle. The last thing I noticed before the darkness swallowed me was the look in Evelyn's eyes. Her eyes dilated with tears, fixed on me as if she knew something had been broken, not just in my body, but in my soul. And then, the world disappeared into absolute silence, and I ceased to exist, at least in the way I had known myself until then. The moment I lost the feeling of heaviness, there was no darkness or light, just a silence that pulsed like a distant drum. Suddenly I felt out of place, as if I were floating above myself. I looked down and saw my body stretched out on the pulpit floor, pale and still, while shaking hands tried to revive it. The anxious murmur of the congregation turned into an indistinct sound, muffled as if I were submerged in water. My gaze fixed on Evelyn, who knelt beside me, tears silently sliding down her face. She held my hand as if she could transmit life through cold skin. Around her, brothers and sisters prayed in unison, an anguished chorus of pleas that made my ethereal heart ache with helplessness. "Pastor Isadora," I heard Marcus shout, but the voice seemed distant, as if it were coming from a tunnel. I tried to move my fingers, open my eyes, make a sound, but nothing happened. My consciousness floated free, observant, unable to interact. Then I noticed something new. The absence of physical pain. There was no heartbeat, no breathing, just a state of pure awareness that allowed me to see every detail with surreal clarity. As I watched, I felt a growing tension, as if I were being pulled by invisible chains beyond the space. The congregation, once so familiar, now seemed like mere actors in a play I was not a part of. A penetrating cold began to envelop my being, replacing powerlessness with primal fear. Then, without warning, I was ripped from that plan. In an instant, the vision of my body in the pulpit was gone, replaced by an immense darkness, the prelude to something even deeper and more frightening. As soon as the pulpit scene disappeared, I was thrown into a dark expanse, a formless space where shadows moved like smoke under invisible drafts. The silence had been replaced by indistinct whispers, voices that intertwined in a cruel, accusatory murmur. First came a low whisper, like the brush of old paper against new paper. "You deceived, you hurt, you were vain." Then other voices joined in a chorus that reverberated inside me, as if they were tearing away every layer of my soul. There was no face, only sharp intentions that pierced my being. I tried to understand where that judgment was coming from. I saw disjointed flashes of moments when my words had caused pain. A member expelled for not following strict doctrines, a young man who walked away after feeling judged rather than loved, even the disappointed look on my own mother's face when I prioritized ministerial success over relationships. The fear intensified when a presence materialized in the darkness, an indistinct figure, shrouded in shadows so dense that it seemed to absorb any light that dared to touch it. His voice was deep, shrill, accusatory like an eternal court. "You preached about God without knowing him," hissed the entity. "You built a kingdom of empty words while souls were lost in the dust of your arrogance." An icy wind enveloped me, and I felt my being tremble under the weight of that condemnation. The feeling of free fall took over me, as if I were falling into a bottomless abyss where time and hope ceased to exist. And then, at the height of that absolute terror, a light appeared. At first faint, then so intense that it ripped through the darkness like silent thunder. The horror and accusation fell silent in an instant, replaced by a silence that pulsed with power and truth. The light wasn't just clarity, it was a living presence, heat that penetrated my essence, undoing every fragment of fear and accusation. I was drawn toward it, not by the impulse to move, but by the irresistible pull of something greater than I could comprehend. As I got closer, shapes began to emerge from the light. First indistinct outlines, then the figure of someone I could only call Christ, not a robed man, but pure compassion personified. His voice sounded straight to the core of my being, not like spoken words, but like a truth I knew before I even understood it. "Isadora," he said, and each syllable was a blade of love and judgment. "You sought honor for yourself, not my glory." He preached words, but he did not live my heart. Then I was shown scenes from my own life, moments of solitary prayer that were actually searches for approval, sermons that extolled my eloquence rather than pointing to grace, looks from congregants who sought comfort and found only expectations. Each scene hit me with an undeniable truth, and there was no arguing. Meanwhile, I felt a painful purification, as if every sin, every act of pride was burned within me, not for punishment, but to reveal the emptiness I had filled with false certainties. I cried, but there were no physical tears. They were tears of the soul. Then he spoke of my church. Grace Hope transformed into a place of cold walls, where voices murmured empty promises and faces walked aimlessly, lost in ritual without encounter. And I felt for the first time deep compassion for those I had failed to truly love. "Come back," he ordered, not in anger, but with gentle urgency. "There is still time to live in truth. The time for me is now." Before I could respond, the light expanded, enveloping me in a hug that dissolved everything. The accusation, the fear, the pride, leaving only the flame of an undeniable calling. Then I felt my being thrown back, through the veil, like a breath thrown back into the world I knew, but now irrevocably transformed. When my eyes opened again, I was no longer in the void or in the pulpit, but in a room lit by cold hospital lamps. My body lay on a gurney, tubes connected to my arm and a monitor emitting a regular rhythm that sounded like strange music to my newly resurrected ears. The pain in my chest was intense. Each breath ripped through my lungs like invisible knives. Dr. Samuel Green leaned over me with an expression of relief mixed with astonishment. "Pastor Winthrop, you're awake," he said, his voice firm but his eyes betraying disbelief. I felt Marcus's presence beside me, his hand squeezing mine tightly. He wore his usual pastoral uniform, but there was something in his gaze that went beyond concern. It was fear. "Isadora, you made us so." Her words trailed off, replaced by silent tears. I looked at Evelyn, sitting in a nearby chair, her hands clasped in prayer, eyes puffy. She held a small crucifix that she had given me weeks ago, now pressed against her chest. The awareness of what I had experienced flooded me. It was neither a dream nor a hallucination. There was something real, something that called me to a responsibility that was impossible to ignore. As the monitor beeped, I became aware of shadows in the corners of the room. Not physical shadows, but a shadowy presence, creeping whispers that tried to stifle my revelation. Instinctively, I whispered, "Jesus, keep me away from this." Immediately, the air seemed to clear. The whispers fell silent, replaced by a heavy, sacred silence. Dr. Green cleared his throat uncomfortably. "His vital signs are stabilizing, but we need to investigate what caused this sudden collapse. A heart attack? Maybe an aneurysm?" I couldn't speak, not now. My words needed to carry weight. True. When he asked my name, I replied in a weak but firm voice, "Isadora Winthrop," and I mentally added, "I'm back, but I'm not the same." As the medical team began the examinations, the room became quiet. The air seemed to vibrate with the urgency of what I needed to do. I had escaped death to carry a warning that burned in my chest. But before I shared what I had seen, I knew I would face resistance, not just from doctors but from spiritual forces who wanted to silence me. Still, a certainty burned inside me. I had been chosen to speak, even if it meant losing everything I had built. When I fully came back to reality, it wasn't just my body that hurt. My soul was in tatters. Each breath cut through my chest like a blade. Each heartbeat reminded me of what I survived. I was transferred to a private room, away from prying eyes, but even there was no refuge. A dense presence hovered over me, like a cloud filled with evil intent. In the following days, I woke up several times in the middle of the night, with the room plunged in darkness, hearing creeping whispers that hissed distorted truths. "You are worthless and no one will believe it. It is better to remain silent." My faith, which was previously supported by certainty and applause, now trembled in the face of that invisible pressure. One morning, I felt something brush my face. There was no wind. There was no one there. The air grew cold, and the room seemed to shrink, trapping me in a cocoon of fear. I closed my eyes and, with a trembling voice, I called out, "Jesus, protect me." In response, I felt a gentle warmth flood my chest, dispelling the shadow that tried to suffocate my mind. During the day, Dr. Green would come in to check my vital signs, but his scientific concerns didn't reach the spiritual abyss I faced. Marcus came to pray beside me, holding my hand tightly. In his eyes, I saw love but also doubt about what I had experienced. Evelyn appeared like a faint ray of light. She sat next to me, held my hand, and whispered prayers of deliverance. In his silence, I found the courage to accept that the battle was not against flesh and blood, but against invisible forces. In a moment of painful clarity, I realized that my ministry as I knew it was over. Every effort to maintain image and reputation was now futile given the urgency of sharing the truth that Christ had revealed to me. The darkness that besieged me tried to convince me to remain silent, promising peace in exchange for silence. But each empty promise was immediately torn apart by the fire of renewed conviction. As I struggled with spiritual harassment, my inner voice grew urgent and clear. No matter the cost, you need to speak up. And so, even without full physical strength, I knew that true rebirth would begin when my words broke through the darkness that tried to silence my soul. In the days leading up to my return to the pulpit, the decision consumed me like an internal fire. Each time my mind drifted to what I had experienced, the accusing darkness, the revealing light, I felt the weight of choice. Preserve my reputation or expose the truth, whatever the cost. When I was released from the hospital, I returned home with a fragile body, but a soul filled with urgency. Marcus came to visit me, face serious, hands restless. "Isadora," he began, hesitating, "there are many who await the testimony of your return. People want to celebrate your recovery." I held his hand, feeling his cool skin against mine. I could see the desire in his eyes, the desire to keep everything the same as before. But something in me refused to back down. "Marcus," I replied in a weak but determined voice, "I can't just go back as if nothing had happened. What I saw is not for celebration, it's an urgent wake-up call." He blinked, confused and hurt. "You speak as if you had died," he murmured. And that was exactly what had happened. The next morning, in front of the congregation gathered for the welcome service, I felt my legs give way. The hall was full, hopeful faces looked at me. The lights were shining, cameras were pointing, and the human heat felt suffocating. I took a deep breath, remembering the light, the presence. So instead of launching into the planned sermon, I raised my hand to silence the choir and walked slowly to the pulpit. "I died," I began, my voice breaking before gaining firmness. "And Jesus showed me something I never wanted to see." The murmur grew into shock. Some whispered blasphemy, others cried confused. I continued. "The ministry I built was built on pride and empty words. I saw the souls of precious people move away from God because of barriers I created. Today, I didn't come to be celebrated. I came to warn." The tension was palpable. Some leaders began to stand up indignant. Evelyn in the front row cried silently, confirming with her gaze that I was not alone. The moment I spoke those words, I felt the dark presence recede like scattered smoke, and the light of that truth remained firm and unshakable within me. The air in the sanctuary felt electrified as I moved into the final moment of my confession. The collective murmur gave way to a tense silence, heavy as a storm cloud about to collapse. My heart was beating fast, not with fear, but with urgency. Every word that would come out of my mouth would be a cry for help to souls trapped in empty faith. "There is still time," I declared, looking each person in the eye. "Titles, positions, and human approval cannot replace a real encounter with God." I saw, with my own eyes, the difference between religion and relationships. And I didn't come here to destroy, but to invite you to choose life. Some in the congregation backed away, shocked. Others approached as if they had been waiting a long time for this truth. I saw leaders murmuring among themselves, indignant, already planning retractions and damage control. But there, in front of them, I felt a weight being lifted from my shoulders. The truth freed both me and those who were willing to hear it. Evelyn stood up, approached the lectern, and held my hand, her tears now expressing relief and recognition. In that simple gesture, I knew that my testimony had reached at least one heart, perhaps the first of many. When I finished, I turned and walked away from the altar without looking back. The church was filled with voices, some calling to hold me back, others to cast me out. But inside me there was no doubt and no regret. The call I received in that transcendent light echoed in every fiber of my being. To be salt and light, not for prestige, but for love and truth. On the way out, I felt the weight of human judgment, but also the peace that comes from walking in God's truth. My ministry had changed forever, no longer a stage for my ego, but an altar of surrender. And as the afternoon sun bathed the facade of Grace Hope Baptist Church, I knew that my life now belonged to something much bigger than I ever imagined. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video, and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.